All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Scenario. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards. And this week, after taking a month or so off, we're going to do a stroll through the wintry lands of Middle Earth. It seems seasonally appropriate. We're entering the holiday season here up in the Northern Hemisphere. So it made sense to kind of go through, talk about the world the world as far as it goes in regards to wintry areas and how we differentiate them. For those of you that are watching this for the first time, this is a world design focused stream, so we're just going to be talking about world design, level design, all those sorts of things. Please don't mind the blazing sun as it shines in here and blinds me. So as part of this stream, I'm only going to be talking about level design, world design. I'm not going to be talking about things like balance, PvMP, server lag, any of those topics. If you have questions about those things, you're better off asking them on the message boards or in the weekly stream that Cordovan runs on Fridays. But I'm certainly happy to answer any world design questions that you might have, even if they're not related to this topic. But the focus of this one is the wintry areas. So we're kind of going all over the place, checking out the different places where snow and ice happen in Middle Earth. Yesterday was a really interesting tour of the regions of the game that have those kinds of weather, and I think I missed a couple. In fact, I'm pretty sure I missed a couple, particularly dungeon spaces. But this should give us a good broad coverage of all the different wintry areas, and each one has a slightly different look and feel to it, so we can talk about how we go about differentiating those areas. Also, I tend to forget to drink water while I am doing those streams, so if it's been a while since you've had seen me take a drink, let me know in chat, and I'll be sure to have a drink of water or ginger ale. So that said, let's get started. Here we are in Frostbluff. Seemed like this was the appropriate place to start, considering the theme of this update. Let me just get I'm having a hard time getting my radar selected. And there we go. Let's get this back up here. All right. So so welcome to Frostbluff. This is the home of the festival lands of Lord of the Rings Online for the Winter Yuletide Festival. It's in a little spot here. It's got its own map. It's physically placed kind of west of Forochel, north of Ered, kind of off in the mountains there. I don't know that it specifically has any real specific lore reason for being there, but here it is. Let me refresh this real quick. Sorry, things are a little ad hoc today. I'm just trying to make sure everything is running smoothly. We did have a little bit of a scheduling hiccup as far as figuring out what server I was going to be running this on. So that in mind, we'll go down through here and see what we've got for chat. So Softneck CR says, why are you making so many cities with so many assets like Umbar that you can't maintain? There are countless flying assets inside Umbar Baharbel. So I would say in that case, they're not intentional. Please bug them for us. We have a great QA team, and we ourselves keep our eye on things as much as we can. But sometimes, when you're working 10, 15, 20, 40 feet above the ground, it's hard to see where things are not lining up exactly. So we do our best to catch those things when we can, and when we can't, and if we've missed them, please by all means file a bug on them so that we can follow up on them and ground them. Do92 says, I love Winterhome. I sometimes map there just to hang out and listen to the music during the summer. Yeah, I think for a while Winterhome was something where we very specifically and intentionally held it as a festival-only space and didn't really want to let people in outside of that. But we've since, I think, with most of our like unique festival spaces, this and the Harvestmouth space, we've set them up so that people can get to them on a whim. Because there's really, like, the quests aren't active, there's really no reason for them to not be accessible. Arabani says, can you talk about hobbits? I'm not sure what you want to talk about in regards to hobbits. But yeah, so the Winterhome area, I think, is very reminiscent of kind of the Forochel forest zones. I think it's probably using these exact same scene files to create the space. And, you know, it being somewhat adjacent to Forochel, that makes sense. From Winterhome, we are going to go to probably the first wintry area that players ever really encounter. We're going to go check out Thorin's Hall and the Vale of Thrain. You know, this was when players start as an elf or a dwarf, they kind of get to experience one of the first world changes that they ever get to see. You know, they get to see that in Archet with the burning of the town, and in Thorin's Hall and the Vale of Thrain, you know, you can see the statue of Thorin up here under construction in the very, very early beginnings of the starter experience, and then in the live version, the instance 0 version of the game, you see it having been built. One of the things when I run around here is I think back like 17 years ago as we were building this, and like how amazing we thought some of these little things that we were doing looked at the time, like this here, which is like a little bit of a landscape texture cheat to make it look and feel like there's, you know, a little bit of a shadow happening there, and how good we felt it looked. And then we kind of go back to it now and compare it to some of the spaces that we're building now, and it doesn't hold up as well as it used to. I think our terrain textures are still great, but the way we work with and build terrain is just so different in comparison. The amount of detail we put into it and the amount of work we put into it is so different from what it used to be that looking at these older spaces makes me kind of a little both nostalgic and a little sad, because I'm just like, I wish we could kind of carte blanche all of this, but it's a lot of work to consider doing something like that. All right, let's see. So Do asks, I have a question. At the party tree, we have tons of fireworks. Can Winterhome have like a New Year's-like thing where New Year's Eve we have a countdown to New Year's, ton of fireworks when it hits midnight? I mean, that's something that could be considered as additions to that festival. I don't think we have any specific plans for that, but I don't know a specific reason why some sort of event like that couldn't happen outside of the weird, outside of the weirdiness with time zones. You know, if you happen to be in Europe and the servers are here in the US, like, how do we determine what midnight is really? So that would be the only hiccup I would say to that, unless it was just a regular event that, you know, at midnight in the game worlds, for example, for a couple of days, you know, in game time is when the events would go off. Do says, since it's close to Forochel, will we ever get a connection path to Frostbluff, or maybe a remastered version to expand even further north above Ered Luin? So I'm sure at some point, one of these days, we will expand the territory of Forochel and Ered Luin so that a connection between Winterhome and other areas would be possible, potentially. I don't want to make any promises as to when that would happen, because like with any space where we kind of do the fill-in gaps, you know, they tend to be lower level spaces. They're not end game spaces, so it's a little hard for us to pin down the whens and the wheres and the whys for doing that sort of inclusion. All right. So now that we've looked at the Vale of Thorin and Thorin's Hall, it's going to be a while before players actually kind of get a good wintry area again. But that next wintry area is Misty Mountains. The Misty Mountains, I think, is where we really wanted to start pushing the concept of snowy terrain, snowy textures, just having things in place that would really evoke the look and feel of a snowy region. So there's a lot of assets that are very specifically built with snow in mind, and we kind of took what we built here and extended it further into Forochel. We had a couple of artists who, I think when we were building Forochel, very easily spent, I would imagine, a couple of months just figuring out what the asset set for that region will be. One of the things that I like that we did about these scene files here is, a lot of the scene assets, and I believe these are updated. These aren't the original scene assets, but they look a little bit more weighed down by snow. They're wintry, so they don't have their leaves on them. So overall, it feels, with the exception of a couple of these things here and there. And then we took the binbul trees, the binbul wood trees, which are some of my favorite, and just really pushed them into the winter mode here in Forochel. We have our abominable snow beasts. And I think in the first iteration of the Misty Mountains, we did a really good job of portraying the look and feel of this space. And then when we did the expansion to the Misty Mountains, I think the internal name for that we called Extreme Misty Mountains, just like we had Extreme Trollshaws. The Extreme Misty Mountains, we tried to push that a little bit further, and tried to pull in more atmosphere and weather effects. And this is the first area, which we won't see it because I'm cloaked right now, but maybe if I uncloak, there might be a rare kicking around somewhere here. But we tried to push the atmosphere a little bit more, make this region feel more like it was wintry with the fog and the snow, and when rare monsters appear in this area, we set it up so that blizzards roll into the space, so it's much harder to kind of see where you're going and what you're doing, and you have to really look for the rare monster if you want to get the blizzard to go away. All right, let's get a good view somewhere. That's a nice view right here. And I'll answer a few more questions. So Eric of Wildwood asks, how about a land of yore with the Great Winter in the Shire? So I think the Tales of Yore concept is something that is really useful for us if we find ourselves wanting to tell stories set in a specific time, particularly in a time that is well outside of the time frame of the ongoing narrative of the game. That's where Azanul Bazaar helped us pretty well, where we could tell that story and have it be set in the past. And I think if we ever found ourselves wanting to tell that story of the Great Winter, we could do that, but it's not something that's currently in our plans. Nomad2409 says, which snowy areas are left to explore in Middle Earth? Well, we have, let me bring up the map real quick. So we have basically way up north are where we can find a lot of them. We've also got Arid Lewin and whatnot all along here, which could explore some wintry areas as well. As you move further south, there's the White Mountains. That could also be host to some wintry areas. And who knows what we may or may not want to do as we move further east. What defines a wintry area isn't necessarily specifically all about just feet of snow and white everywhere. There are subtle variations on it. And we'll get to see some of those as we kind of go through things. Let's head on over to Forochel now. This is the area where I think we kind of like hit the peak of wintry areas, and we really wanted to push the concept of having multiple styles of winter in this area itself. We have this kind of wintry forest here that gives way to glaciers, which gives way to tundras and other ice fields. So there's a variety of kind of wintry themes that we all just like jammed into here. And part of that is, at the time we were building this, one of our major intentions with building landscape was to make sure that even within a region there were very distinct biomes within that. And I think that's a great idea for us to have. But I think, not specifically in Forochel, but in other areas of the world, we push too heavily on that, where like you would have basically every single subsection of the region kind of have a completely different look and feel. And that's a little bit too much, too drastic of a change in how things go. Like I think about North Downs, for example, where the North Downs is very, very heavily like, you've got the fields of Fornost, you've got just like the grasslands, you've got the farmlands, you've got the swamps, you've got the marsh, you've got the troll forest, you've got the ravage lands, you've got the Orc Valley. There's just like, there's so much going on with so much variety that it really emphasizes that theme park feel that Lotro and a lot of older MMOs kind of leaned into a lot at the time that they were at their peak in the mid 2000s and whatnot. The theme park MMORPG. Even running through here, you look at this, like we're now in the glacier area, and there's a part of me that like looks at how we built this and goes, oh, like there's detail that's lacking that we could do so much better now if we had the time for it. Green Tea asks, at what stage is music created for an area? Do the composers get to experience the landscape and perhaps quest before the tracks? Which Lotro soundtracks are your favorite, and you think they complement the landscape and world building the most? So usually we involve Bill Champagne, our composer, pretty early on, just once we've kind of figured out what the character and look and feel of a region is going to be like, so he can start thinking about it, coming up with ideas, composing, figuring out what instruments he needs to bring in. And then it's usually just a process of him over the course of our development cycle, kind of playing around with different tunes. He creates a lot of audio tracks. And I think the most recent one that he's done between Umbar and Before the Shadow, like, are pretty amazing soundtracks. I have to say my one like guilty pleasure bit of soundtrack work is when we did the original Goblin Town, when we first made the Goblin Town dungeons, and we had requested the music team at the time kind of make tracks that were inspired by the Rankin Bass animated films, particularly the Goblin Town tracks. So as you go through those areas, the music in there is very heavily inspired by the old animation. All right, so since we were talking about just like different biomes and whatnot, we've come through the forest and the glaciers. one of the things in Forochel that we really wanted to do was also have kind of a geothermal component to it. So we have areas that are reminiscent of Malinhad in Angmar, but with a snowy twist that's a bit less sinister. Trying to remember where. There we go. Bit less sinister in comparison to what Angmar is like. As I'm running around here and looking at all of like the ice and whatnot, and then thinking about the puddle texture that we have in Umbar, and thinking, oh, some of these terrain textures, particularly the icy terrain textures, could like really greatly benefit from that like super crisp specular on them. That would just like make the ice feel more like ice than I think we had a lot of our older ice looking like. So after Forochel, I think the next area that really had any sort of weather to it is up here in Aregion at the Redhorn Gate. So I just popped into the cliff overlooking it. But as you approach, you can hop down off the cliff and down into the Redhorn Snowfall. So this is, the Redhorn Pass was what the Fellowship was going to take in order to, deliver the ring to safety, or deliver the ring, and unfortunately, avalanche, snow, all that good stuff. So, not able to go this way. When we introduced the Vales Vanduin and the Gladden Fields, we thought it would be a fun little like nod to have the pass accessible at least from one way. Because from the storytelling perspective, we couldn't really make and weren't really comfortable with making it a two-way pass, because when you first encounter this space, you encounter it in its closed off state, and we didn't have a really good way of phasing things so that you could basically have both. All right, so back to some questions real quick. We'll take a look out down the pass. Nars says, would love a revamped Misty Mountains someday. Honestly, probably my least favorite of the old regions, and would love rock and mist assets from the Vales, etc. there. I think the Misty Mountains is a region that pioneered some of the sculpting concepts that we use now. Certainly the tools, we used to build some of the mountains there, as well as the mountains around Rivendell. We used World Machine to do that way back, but the process for integrating that output into our actual height map after we had developed what we wanted was very onerous, and so that method really kind of fell away after it was used, in part because the person that had pioneered the method had gone away, and the tools, it didn't seem like there was going to be a good way to get the tools support that we wanted and needed for it. But being able to kind of bring that back has really helped us kind of advance how we develop our landscape through some very simple tools alternatives, as opposed to trying to make the old ways work. So now here we are at Nars Peak. This is another frosty area, home to one of the few dragons remaining in Middle-earth, and one of the last remaining kind of wintry areas in Eriador anyways that players get to explore. I think there's one more left in current playable Eriador anyways, before we head over to Rovanion and beyond for our other wintry spaces. But the thing that I liked about this area here is it kind of evoked, and we'll take the easy way down, but it evokes a lot of what I really liked about the kind of thawing areas of the lowlands um, in Arid Luin, and kind of like does it better. We have, it's a little bit springtime here. It's warm enough that things might be starting to grow, but there are still patches of snow here and there, frost clinging to the area. It's not quite warm enough to rain, so you still have the snow falling, and I like the feel of that. It is an area of transition. It is a region of transition, and so it's not full-blown winter, it's not full-blown spring, it's somewhere in between, and I like how that feels in this space. Do asks, question, on the Lord of the Rings map, Misty Mountains go a long way, all the way up to Gundabad. Do you have any idea what stories could be made? Maybe some new dwarf cities when you guys return to dwarves. Do people really want us to return to dwarves? We spent a considerable amount of time on them over the last few years, and I feel like whenever the potential for doing dwarf stuff kind of comes back, players like are a little shell shocked by it. We brought in like Farouk Zahar for King's Gondor, and there are a few people that were just like, oh, more dwarfs. So I think there's certainly the possibility for more Misty Mountains, because it is basically the whole north-south mountain range. There's more possibility for it in the future. Whether or not it involves dwarves, who knows? I think we ourselves as a development team are a little bit dwarfed out at the moment ourselves, and are looking forward to playing in warmer, more interesting climates. Or I shouldn't say more interesting, but at the very least, warmer climates. So here we are now in Tal Mathedris, which is, I don't think we've had very many cities basically that exist in a snowy environment. So I think this is where this stands out, in that it is a snowy environment for a town to be in. The transition level from where it goes from snowy to not is like pretty harsh. Like you basically get down out of the hills here and onto waterside, and it's all of a sudden not winter. So I might have like transitioned that a little bit more, but overall I like the feel of just a snowy village. We had that in Winterhome, we had that a bunch in Forochel. This is like something that players hadn't quite gotten yet, something that's a little bit bigger. The Losoth capital was a fairly large city, but I think the structures for the Losoth people, the igloos and various buildings, made it a little hard to make something feel like a city. Kerwin asks, hi Matt, as a world designer and landscape artist, I'm curious about what you would do. I'm not sure I understand that question. What would you do if okay, so he said yes would go? I'm not sure what that means. Waystone Dandelion says, one of the things I like about this area, which I'm assuming he's talking about the Trollshaws, or the Misty Mountains, is the dynamic weather around some of the boss mobs. The fogs close in, and I start looking around nervously. Yeah, we wanted to have something that evoked dread, but was not itself dread. And we wanted, since we had gotten the ability to do these weather systems, we wanted to kind of see if we could, pull it off, like make a really interesting weather system that felt ominous and scary. Do says, you mentioned rolling landscape weather, and I know maybe I've asked this a few times, but can we get rain and fog and other weather, but in Eriador we lack seasonal snow. Can we get seasonal weather like how Lotro does the Tolkien calendar? Because Eriador should get snow since it is not in the deep south like Gondor or Ardaglow. So we don't do seasonal changes to our landscapes because our landscape is locked in in the time that the content for it is made. So in the Shire, it's always going to be whatever timing, whatever year, month, day it is in the Shire. It's never going to change seasonally. We'd have to make new versions of it to really do that. And we did that with like the Bree skirmish. There was, I think, one or two of the skirmishes have the long winter or the great winter as one of the skirmishes. It's just a snowy version of Breetown. So here we are at Eobar's Peak. One of the things that I wanted to talk about here is some precursor tech for what we do have in Umbar now. You can see the trees here. They're kind of like swaying a little bit in the weather. And the intention behind this is, having these trees, having these assets that react to the kind of weather, the kind of wind that we have in our day files. And so these trees here know, oh, hey, this is stormy weather, stormy day file, so we should be swaying a little bit. And we took that tech, and that tech is now present in Umbar, where you can see a lot of the palms and whatnot kind of gently swaying, and that's because the day file has wind properties built into it that the trees themselves know, oh, hey, I've got this wind property I'm supposed to be doing this thing while the wind is blowing. This is something that we used years and years ago, and then I think we either just kind of forgot about it or we held off on it because we weren't sure of the performance impact that it would have. This was a fun area to build. I remember building this instance. Just something that I was at the time trying to push what we had done in terms of decoration on landscape and usage of landscape to kind of contour an area, and using these giant buildings and whatnot in a way that hadn't been used before, and then it results in an eagle egg. Normally there's a nest here, but I think that's on a layer, so that's why it's not visible. But all right. Let us take a look at some more questions, and then we'll move on to the next winter area. So Softsnake GR says, talking about blizzards, when to expect sandstorms. That's actually something that I expect we'll be talking about tomorrow. We are working on kind of our landscape plans for the next 2 years, and some of that includes what we want to do for things like weather and other effects on landscape. So we were actually, I think last week or the week before, talking about kind of the opposite of, if you look at my character here, or maybe not my character, the temperature settings may not be set, but in most snowy areas, you can kind of see the fog off your breath. And we were trying to figure out, well, what would the opposite of that be? If we were in a warm area, an arid area, a desert area where the heat is just oppressive, what kind of effects could we apply to the character, to the screen, to kind of evoke that feel? And that's some stuff that we'll be talking about over the course of the next weeks and months as we get our planning out of the way for the next couple of years of landscape direction. Nars says, I'd love to see the coastline of Ered Luin offer us a more northern seaside experience, Ireland, foggy, high cliffs, etc. Goger says, seems like a weird question, but Angmar isn't covered in snow. At least the portions of it that we've visited aren't, but the realm of Angmar can extend further north than we currently have available to play in. I think with the current version of Angmar, the intention behind it was really just to lean super into evil, and we didn't spend as much thought and effort then into building ecosystem and building geography in the way that we do now, and thinking about what makes sense for things. Like with Angmar, we were very much focused on checking the box of like evil place, yes, because our game needs an evil place. But I think if we had it to do it all over again, we'd be a bit more mindful about the kinds of weather, the kinds of environments and biomes that we would see in an area, and how we interpret what the source material says is in those areas. Lost Shire Hobbit says, my favorite part of Forochel is the sky. How did you guys manage to capture the northern lights so well? That was one of our artists basically going off into R&D land for a couple of months. She had, I think, 6 or 7 different attempts at like trying things, and each time she tried, she was just like, I don't like this as much, I want to make this change, I don't like that as much, I want to make this change. And so she just kept like iterating and iterating and iterating until she, landed on the final artwork that you see now in the skies above Forochel. I've reused that asset a few times here and there here we go. And get this nice like overlay effect. Super cold. But I've used that effect a couple of times here and there for like unique one-off either day files or instances, because it is a really cool effect. Let's see, a few more questions while we're checking things out here. Soft Snake GR says, why are there green frills over snow? And that sometimes it is an oversight on our part. A lot of the times when we are doing frill placements through our scenery system, we miss spots here and there. I don't think the green over the snow looks great, though in some spots, like we were looking at in Enedwaith, where there was kind of the rimy, frosty grass, and then the frills coming up through that. I feel like that the snow peeking through could be okay there in some instances. I really, really like this forest. I think this is where Forochel nails kind of the quintessential alpine frozen forest. I think this really does a great job at a more magical style of forest, a magical frosty forest. Every so often we do push the magical look and feel of things, and I think this is one of those spaces where we do that, and in part because story demands it. Everything that's happening here with Nursgum or Nursgul or whatever, the ice giant. I think it makes sense for us to push things in a little bit of a frosty way, and lean a little bit more into magic, something that feels magical. And then you drop down like I just did, and now it's no longer wintry land. Let's see, questions. Green Tea says, can you describe what kind of an amount of work is needed to update low-resolution textures and what issues there might be in the process? Why are even some new textures quite low resolution? It's all about trying to do what we can to maintain performance in a region. Usually, the lower resolution a texture is, the less video memory it eats up, which means the more video memory you have to spare when it comes to trying to render other things in the game. Sometimes a texture may feel like it's low resolution when it is actually completely expected resolution, but it is mapped out on an object that is much larger than it should be. We did get some great tech with Before the Shadow, which allows us to make rocks and make just assets in general scalable and have the textures on them not scale with it, so they stay a set fixed size while the asset may grow. And that's going to help us a lot when it comes to taking things like rocks and cliffs and whatnot and using them to build bigger obstructions and bigger edifices without having to worry about the textures coming across too blurry. Let's see, a couple more questions. Soft Snake GR says, why not dwarves? The most time we ever spent in Lotro is with humans. I totally get that, and I understand that, and that's something that we ourselves are aware of. And we want to do what we can to try to inject some more variety into that. The byproduct of setting Lord of the Rings in the time that it is set in is that it is a very human-centric world by the time we get to where we are in the story of Lord of the Rings. So it's very hard to incorporate things like hobbits and elves and dwarves in a way that doesn't feel forced. I think dwarves are a little bit easier just because, outside of the race of men, the dwarves are the next most prolific, people of Middle Earth. Elves are, present, but not out in as much force as they used to be. So it's harder to find spaces for things like, for peoples like elves and hobbits that feel natural, if that makes sense. So Umbar question, below Umbar there is a big mountain range too. Can that be a home in there for Umbar dwarves? That's something we've talked about as well. Like there are many different clans of dwarves out there, and not all of them live in the Lonely Mountain or in Arid Luin. They are scattered throughout the world. We introduced with the Legacy of Durin storyline, we introduced basically all of the known clans of dwarves. And having introduced them, that gives us then the opportunity to explore them further when we get to the areas where it makes sense to bring them in. Arabani says, I don't mind dwarves, but more hobbits would be nice, and less elves. Much, much, much less elves. I feel like you'd be in the minority there. We actually have we've had a lot of player feedback about wanting more elf-centered content. We've talked about housing, and our goal is for the next premium housing neighborhood to be elves, an elf-focused one. And that's something that we're in the midst of discussing now as well. So I think hobbits are probably the hardest to find a home for. But let's see if my client loads. Come on, you can do it. It may not let me. I may need to restart the client. So while we're waiting on the client to do its thing, let's see about answering some more questions. Uptown Coyote says, still impressed with how designers managed to make Gundabad feel new and distinct from Moria. That was our goal, is we wanted to evoke Moria, but we did not want to replicate Moria. And I think there are some spaces where you can kind of enter in. I may need to reboot the client, so I'm going to do that real quick. There are certainly spaces where there is that Moria feel, And I think we succeeded in kind of giving each area the feel of Moria, but giving it its own unique space, unique design. Let's see. Lomfine says, I like the Redhorn Pass in the Aladan Elro here. Further adventures missions is a possibility to make it accessible in the open world. So I remember that being made. I'm not exactly sure where it is in terms of physical space. I think it is in the Region 2 Caradhras open world space. I think it's physically next to where Balrog in a crater is. I'm not sure about it being available in Instance 0. I'd have to like do some more research on that in order to be able to answer that question for you. Where is Ivar's Peak located in Middle Earth? That I also don't remember where I put it. Because I think I might have it might be a copy of the landscape south of the main playable Misty Mountains. That might be where I put it, but I don't recall off the top of my head. So we're having some issues with me loading into the world right now. So hopefully this will launch and we'll be good to go. If not, I'm happy to keep answering questions while we hang out here, and hopefully it will do its thing. So we'll go down through here. Also, are the stars strange in Umbar strange? I didn't notice a difference in the night skybox for Umbar, but maybe I missed it. So I had a conversation with our lore people about this after the preview streams, where the question about the stars came up, and I asked our lore person. His response was basically that Umbar is actually not far enough south for the stars to be strange yet. We would have to go much further south in order for that to happen. That was the lore response to it. So let's see. Nars says, hate to ask this here, but have you seen bug reports on Stonegate Path in Lindleby scenario? The foliage is missing and the basement hooks don't go all that far. I haven't seen any reports on those come in yet. I know there was some bug fixing that I had done in there a while back about things like trees and whatnot intersecting rocks. That may be what you're referring to as far as the trees go. If any of the trees are missing. As far as foliage goes, bushes and plant frills, that's news to me. So there may be some properties that got changed on hooks to make stuff go away. Do asks, do you have to place every tree, bush, and rock like manually? It doesn't take a very long time. We do not place everything manually. We go through and we have a system called the scene file system, which is effectively a configuration file where we put in all the information that we want for the different kinds of trees, rocks, bushes, grass, the frequency that those things will appear, what slopes they'll appear on, can they appear above water, in water, those sorts of things. And that is our broad stroke paint down of our scene files on the terrain. And then we can go through and adjust specific placement. Like if we're like, oh, this cliff, we want more trees at the base of this cliff, we can paint down more trees there. And then when it comes to bigger structures, things like big boulders or cliffs, we often hand place those because leaving those to the scene file system, it's not quite smart enough to know like, oh, hey, this is a cliff, I should put this here and jam this in here. Let's see. Question from Do again. In the future, when we walk or run on ice, can we get animations where we slip, fall, or slide? We don't have a very, outside of mounted combat, we don't really have a concept of momentum for just normal characters walking and running around. I would be more it would be more likely that you would see that sort of emote or that sort of animation as a cosmetic emote of some sort, whether that is like an emote that you yourself can do, or one of the like prank emotes. Say it's like someone has a bucket of water and they splash the water on the ground and it turns into ice underneath the player. All right, so it doesn't look like I'll be able to connect to the server right now. It appears to be down, but I can continue answering questions for a few more minutes. We're almost out of time anyways. The only places we really didn't get to, I was really hoping to run around the Steel Keep. We didn't get to Carbronach or the Welkin Lofts or Azanul Bazaar. But by and large, we hit most of the wintry areas. If you are interested in seeing the wintry areas that we haven't gotten to, that we didn't get to yet as part of the stream, I know for a fact that the remaining areas, Carbronach, Welkin Lofts, Cloven Gap, Azanul Bazaar, all of those, and portions of Elderslade, all of those are available as streams on YouTube, so you can check out the individual region ones if you're curious about seeing those spaces as well. All right, let's see. Going down through here for a few more questions, and then we'll wrap it up for the night. So there was mention of new star map. We covered that a little bit already. The premium elf housing fills the space between Lothlorien and Great River. Keep your fingers crossed for that. We have not come to any final decision in regards to what into what location and what style we want to build in yet. But when we are ready to talk about it, we'll certainly let you know. Will the Iron Door in Forochel open in one day? Maybe. Who knows? It all depends on whether or not we have something that we want to do in those areas. Green Tea asks, looking at Minas Morgul from Ithilien after battle, we can see the city in bright light without darkness that sets as soon as you enter in the Morgul zone. What kind of technology is responsible for displaying dark skies, and what would be needed to have it visible from a different zone? So right now, our day files are all dependent on the space you are standing in. So the space you are standing in, that is the day file you would get. In order to change what things look like in the distance, we would need a different concept for how day files work. We would need to treat it like a volume more so than a location-based thing. And we don't have the tech for that. It's not the ideal way to present things like that. And we may come up with solutions to kind of address some of those things in the future. But for right now, this is kind of where things are. Doomy, so it is official, new housing is elf. I would say it's as official as it can officially be without making an official announcement. But we don't have a timetable for its release yet. Luna Moonraker asks, if you could use one housing decoration in your garden, which would it be? Giant cave claw not allowed. Well, I would just make an even bigger cave claw. All right, everyone. Well, we are just about at 3 o'clock, and with the client down, I'm not going to be able to pop into any more places, but thank you, everyone, for taking the tour through the frozen lands of Middle-earth, and for letting me have the month off last month after several back-to-back streams of Umbar. I think we'll be getting back to our regular casual stroll streams starting next month sometime. We'll probably start in Gondor, because we only really have Gondor and Mordor left to stroll through. We've covered all of Eriador, we've covered all of Rovanion, and really those two are the only places that we have left to cover. and then we start trying to figure out what we want to do for streams after that. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to put the regions up for vote like I have other previous ones, or just kind of go through the regions in release order. I'm still thinking about that. But anyways, hope everyone has a great holiday season. If you haven't yet, hop into the game and start playing through the Yuletide Festival and get your new cosmetics and gear through there. If you haven't picked up the expansion pack, now's a great time to do it. We've just patched in craft guilds, and there's new missions and whatnot to kind of work to allow you to spend your holiday time. So anyways, thank you everyone. It was great walking through the wintry areas, and I hope to see you all next month as we begin our tour of regions 4 and 5. Have a great weekend, everyone.